Poor black boy married elderly woman. 7 days later, he learned her secret fortune. The old plantation house loomed before Marcus Johnson like a specter from another time, its peeling white paint and sagging porch a testament to faded glory. At 23, Marcus stood at the iron gates, clutching a small duffel bag containing everything he owned. His dark skin glistened with sweat in the humid Louisiana afternoon as he hesitated, wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. "You can still walk away," he whispered to himself, glancing back at the dusty road that led to town. "Nobody would blame you." But the memory of his grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. "Sometimes, child, the hardest choices are the ones that save us." 3 days ago, he had married Eleanor Beaumont, a 78-year-old white woman he barely knew. The whispers in town had been immediate and cruel, gold digger opportunist worse. What they didn't know was that Eleanor was dying of cancer and needed a caretaker for her final months, someone she could trust with her beloved home rather than distant relatives who would sell it immediately. In exchange for marrying her and promising to maintain the property for at least 5 years after her passing, Marcus would eventually inherit the dilapidated plantation, a chance to transform generational poverty into something resembling security. Was it exploitation? Was it mercy? Or was it something more complex, a transaction between two desperate souls, each with something the other needed? Marcus pushed open the gate with a creak that seemed to echo across decades. As he approached the house, he noticed Eleanor watching from an upstairs window, her thin silhouette barely visible behind lace curtains. The moral weight of what they'd done pressed down on him with each step. He was now husband to a woman he'd met only twice before their courthouse ceremony. "What price am I really paying for this inheritance?" he murmured as he climbed the worn steps to the front door. Little did he know that in exactly 7 days, he would discover a truth about Eleanor Beaumont's fortune that would shatter everything he thought he understood about wealth, sacrifice, and the true nature of inheritance. The floorboards creaked beneath Marcus's feet as Eleanor led him through the grand foyer of Beaumont House. Despite her frail condition, she moved with the practiced grace of someone who had navigated these spaces for decades. "This will be your home now too, Mr. Johnson," Eleanor said, her voice refined but weakened by illness. She had insisted on calling him Mr. Johnson despite their legal union. "I hope you'll find some peace here." Marcus nodded, taking in the faded grandeur around him, crystal chandeliers clouded with dust, ornate furniture draped with sheets, and walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Beaumonts stretching back generations. The air smelled of old books, furniture polish, and something medicinal that clung to Eleanor. "I appreciate the opportunity, Mrs. Beaumont," Marcus replied, maintaining the formality she had established. "I'll do my best to honor our arrangement." Eleanor studied him, her pale blue eyes sharp despite the illness ravaging her body. "I believe you will. That's why I chose you." The question had been burning inside him since she'd approached him with her unusual proposal 3 weeks ago. "Why me? There must have been others more qualified." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's thin lips. "I observed you for months at the library where you worked. You treated those old books with respect and care. You helped elderly patrons with patience. And when you thought no one was watching, you slipped your lunch to that homeless veteran who sits in the park." She paused, leaning more heavily on her cane. "Character reveals itself in small moments, Mr. Johnson." Marcus felt exposed, uncomfortable with her scrutiny and uncertain how to respond to her praise. "The library let me go last month." "I know, budget cuts." Eleanor gestured toward a winding staircase. "Your room is upstairs across from mine. My nurse visits daily to help with my medications and bathing. Your primary responsibility is maintaining the property and keeping me company in my final days. I'm told I have perhaps 3 months." The clinical way she discussed her impending death struck Marcus as both brave and desperately sad. "Is there family I should contact?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "My family and I parted ways long ago. My nephew William is my only living relative, and he's been notified of our arrangement." Was displeased, Marcus could imagine. A young black man suddenly married to a wealthy white woman from an old Southern family. The scandal alone would fuel gossip for months, regardless of the platonic nature of their arrangement. "The town will talk," Marcus said. "Let them." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "I've outlived most of my critics, and the opinions of the remainder concern me not at all. You, however, will face their judgment long after I'm gone." Her frankness was refreshing, if unsettling. "I've faced judgment before." "Not like this," Eleanor replied, her expression somber. "The burden of being a Beaumont, even by marriage, carries its own weight. Are you prepared for that?" Before Marcus could answer, a fit of coughing seized Eleanor. He instinctively moved to support her, but she waved him away, pulling a handkerchief from her pocket to cover her mouth. When she pulled it away, Marcus glimpsed a spot of blood before she quickly folded the cloth. "I should rest," she said. "Dinner is at 6. Mrs. Washington comes in to cook and clean 3 times a week. You'll meet her tomorrow. Until then, please explore the grounds. Consider what you might want to change when." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung between them. "When you're dead," Marcus thought, "and I'm left with whatever this is." After Alina retired to her room, Marcus wandered the sprawling first floor, feeling like an intruder in someone else's history. The library contained thousands of volumes bound in leather. The dining room could seat 20. The parlor featured a grand piano gathering dust. Everything whispered of former opulence now faded by time and neglect. Through French doors at the back of the house, Marcus stepped onto a stone terrace overlooking gardens gone wild. Beyond them stood several outbuildings, including what had once been slave quarters. The knowledge sent a chill through him despite the afternoon heat. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from his best friend, Devin. "You really went through with it?" "Man, I still think this is crazy," Marcus typed back. "What choice did I have? Grandma's medical bills wiped out our savings, and I've been sleeping on your couch for a month. There's always a choice. This just seems wrong somehow." Marcus stared at the screen, then at the overgrown gardens before him. "It's complicated. She needs someone. I need somewhere. Maybe it's wrong, but it feels like the only path forward right now. Just be careful." Rich white folks don't give away fortunes to black boys from the projects without a catch. Marcus pocketed his phone without responding. Devin's warning echoed his own doubts. What was he missing? What was Alina's true motivation? And could he live with himself if this arrangement was something darker than it appeared? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the neglected grounds, Marcus made a promise to himself. He would honor his commitment to Alina, but he would also uncover the full truth about Beaumont House and the woman who had chosen him as her unlikely heir. Something told him that beneath the surface of their unusual arrangement lay secrets that neither time nor terminal illness had managed to bury. Day 2 at Beaumont House began with the arrival of Mrs. Washington, a stout black woman in her 60s who had been cooking and cleaning for Alina for over 20 years. She regarded Marcus with undisguised suspicion as Alina introduced them in the kitchen. "So you're the young man who's married Miss Alina," Mrs. Washington said, looking him up and down while kneading dough with flour-covered hands. "Interesting career choice." "Darling," Alina admonished gently, "Mr. Johnson is my husband and the future master of Beaumont House. Please accord him the respect that position deserves." Mrs. Washington's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "Of course, Miss Alina." "No disrespect intended." She turned to Marcus. "Coffee, Mr. Johnson?" "Please," Marcus said, uncomfortable with being served by a woman old enough to be his mother. "And it's just Marcus." "I'll stick with Mr. Johnson for now," Mrs. Washington replied, pouring him a cup. "Earn the first name." Alina smiled faintly at the exchange before excusing herself for her morning medications. Once she had left, Mrs. Washington turned her full attention to Marcus. "Let's be clear about something, young man. I've watched 3 generations of Beaumonts live and die in this house. I knew Miss Alina when she was a girl with ribbons in her hair. So whatever game you think you're playing, it's not a game," Marcus interrupted. "It's an arrangement that benefits us both." "Hum," Mrs. Washington hummed skeptically. "And I suppose you're just overcome with love for a dying woman 55 years your senior," Marcus set his coffee cup down. "No. I'm not pretending this is a love match, but I do respect her and I intend to honor our agreement. Which is, I care for her and the property. In exchange, the house becomes mine after she's gone, provided I maintain it for at least 5 years. Mrs. Washington studied him for a long moment. "And you think that's a fair trade? This house is worth millions, even in its current condition." Marcus hadn't known the exact value, but he managed to keep his expression neutral. "Alina set the terms, I accepted them. And what about Mr. William? I imagine he has something to say about his inheritance going to a stranger." "William hasn't visited his aunt in 3 years," Marcus replied, repeating what Alina had told him. "He's made his priorities clear." Mrs. Washington shook her head. "You don't know what you're stepping into, boy. The Beaumonts have history and not the kind you read about in textbooks." "What kind of history?" She turned back to her dough, punching it down with perhaps more force than necessary. "Not my place to say, but if I were you, I'd start asking questions about where all that Beaumont money came from in the first place and where it went." She glanced at him. "And why Miss Alina is living like this when the Beaumonts used to be the richest family in the parish." Before Marcus could press further, Alina returned to the kitchen. The conversation shifted to meal plans and a list of repairs needed around the property. But Mrs. Washington's words lingered in Marcus's mind as he set about examining the failing gutters and rotting porch railings. That afternoon, while Alina napped, Marcus explored the second floor of the house. Most of the rooms were closed off, furniture covered and unused for what seemed like decades. At the end of the hallway, he discovered a locked door. Curious, he made a mental note to ask Alina about it later. In his exploration, he found himself in what appeared to be a study. Unlike the other rooms, this one showed signs of regular use. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a large desk dominated the center of the room. On it sat several framed photographs. Marcus picked up one showing a much younger Alina with a handsome black man in an army uniform. They were standing close, too close for the casual racism of what must have been the 1960s. Their body language spoke of intimacy, of a connection that transcended the social boundaries of the era. He was studying the photo when a voice behind him made him jump. "That was Robert," Alina said, standing in the doorway leaning on her cane. "Robert Washington." Marcus carefully replaced the photograph. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. It's your house too now. Prying is permitted." Alina moved slowly into the room and lowered herself into a leather armchair. "You've met his sister this morning, Darlene. Mrs. Washington is Robert's sister," Marcus asked, pieces beginning to connect. Alina nodded. "Robert worked on the grounds here when we were young. He was everything to me." Her voice softened with memory. "We loved each other in secret for years. When he was drafted for Vietnam, we planned to run away together when he returned." Her fingers traced the frame of the photograph. "He never came home." Marcus sat in the chair opposite her, absorbing this revelation. "I'm sorry. It was a lifetime ago," Alina said, though her eyes suggested the wound remained fresh. "My father discovered our plans. He was furious, threatened to disown me, to have Robert arrested on false charges if we didn't end things. Then the war made it all moot." "Is that why you and your family are estranged?" Alina's laugh was bitter. "That was just the beginning of our estrangement. The Beaumonts have always chosen family legacy over human decency. I chose differently." She regarded Marcus with sudden intensity. "Do you know why I selected you specifically?" Marcus shook his head. "You remind me of him, not in looks but in spirit, the way you carry yourself with dignity despite circumstances that would crush many, the kindness I observed in your everyday interactions." She paused. "And you needed a home as desperately as this home needs someone who will care for it properly." The weight of her words settled over Marcus. "What happened to the Beaumont fortune Mrs. Washington mentioned?" A shadow passed over Alina's face. "That's a conversation for another day. You've been here only 36 hours, Mr. Johnson. Some truths require a foundation of trust." She struggled to stand, and this time accepted Marcus's offered arm. As he helped her back to her room, Marcus felt the complexity of their arrangement deepening. Alina wasn't just a wealthy white woman making an eccentric end-of-life decision. She was a woman with her own painful history, making choices that seemed to reach back across decades to right some ancient wrong. That night, as Marcus lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old house settling, he wondered what other secrets lurked within these walls, and what Alina's true fortune, or lack thereof, might actually be. On the morning of the third day, Marcus woke to the sound of raised voices. He dressed quickly and followed the commotion to the front parlor, where he found Alina facing off with a well-dressed man in his 50s. Even without an introduction, Marcus recognized the family resemblance. This must be William Beaumont, Alina's nephew. "This is absurd, Aunt Alina," William was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You can't possibly be serious about this arrangement." He gestured dismissively toward Marcus as he entered the room. Alina, despite her frailty, sat straight-backed in her chair. "I'm perfectly serious, William. May I introduce my husband, Marcus Johnson?" "Marcus, this is my nephew, William Beaumont." William didn't offer his hand or even fully turn to acknowledge Marcus. "This marriage is a sham, and any judge in Louisiana will see it for what it is, elder exploitation. I've already spoken with my attorneys." "Your attorneys can speak until they're blue in the face," Alina replied calmly. "I've been declared of sound mind by 3 separate doctors, and my marriage is perfectly legal." "He's after your money," William spat. "What money, William?" Alina asked with a hint of amusement. "You know as well as I do that the Beaumont fortune is long gone." William's jaw tightened. The house is mine to do with as I please," Alina interrupted, "and I please to leave it to someone who will preserve it rather than sell it to developers for a quick profit, as you've been suggesting I do for years." Marcus cleared his throat. "Mr. Beaumont, I understand this must be difficult." William rounded on him, eyes flashing. "You understand nothing. You're an opportunist who's taken advantage of a dying woman." "That's enough," Alina said sharply. Marcus has shown me more consideration in 3 days than you have in the last decade. He's agreed to care for me and for Beaumont House after I'm gone. What exactly are you offering? The question seemed to take some of the wind out of William's sails. He straightened his already immaculate tie. I'm offering to protect you from being manipulated in your vulnerable state. Aliner's laugh was dry. I may be dying, William, but I'm far from vulnerable. I've made my decision. Marcus stays and Beaumont House passes to him upon my death, provided he fulfills the conditions we've agreed upon. What conditions? William demanded. That's between my husband and me, Aliner replied. Now, unless you've come to make amends and build a relationship in my final months, I think we've said all that needs saying. William's face flushed red. He pointed a finger at Marcus. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. He turned back to Aliner. When you come to your senses, call me. With that, he stormed out, the front door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. Aliner sighed, suddenly looking more tired than Marcus had yet seen her. I apologize for my nephew, she said. William has always felt entitled to the Beaumont legacy without understanding what that legacy truly entails. Marcus sat in the chair opposite her. He seems convinced I'm after your money. William sees the world through the lens of his own motivations, Aliner replied. He cannot imagine someone acting from anything but self-interest because that's all he knows. She adjusted the blanket over her legs. But his visit raises an important point. We should discuss the financial realities of your inheritance. Marcus leaned forward, listening intently. Beaumont House is valuable, yes, but it's also a tremendous responsibility. The property taxes alone are substantial. Maintenance costs are significant, and while there is some money set aside for immediate repairs, it isn't the fortune William imagines. I understand, Marcus said, though he was beginning to wonder if he truly did. The scale of what he was taking on was becoming clearer and more daunting by the day. Do you? Aliner asked, studying him. This house has been both blessing and curse to my family for generations. It represents wealth built on suffering, yet it's also the only home I've ever known. She paused. I've lived modestly these past decades because much of what was left of the Beaumont money went to a purpose my father would have abhorred. It was my small attempt at reparation. The word hung between them, reparation. Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down, a history in which his ancestors and hers would have stood on opposite sides. What purpose? He asked. Aliner shook her head. All in good time, Mr. Johnson. For now, know that what you're inheriting comes with both privilege and obligation. I believe you're equal to both. Later that afternoon, as Marcus was examining a leaking pipe in the basement, Mrs. Washington found him. I heard about Mr. Williams' visit, she said without preamble. Marcus straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. Word travels fast. In this house, it always has. She handed him a wrench from a nearby workbench. You'll need this. Pipe's been leaking for months. Thanks. Marcus tightened the connection, stemming the drip. Mrs. Washington, what can you tell me about the Beaumont fortune? She regarded him thoughtfully. What makes you think I know anything about that? You said you've watched 3 generations of Beaumonts, you're Robert's sister, and you clearly have Aliner's trust. Mrs. Washington's expression softened slightly at the mention of her brother. Miss Aliner told you about Robert? Marcus nodded. Some, not everything, I think. No, she wouldn't have. Mrs. Washington sighed. The Beaumonts made their money in cotton before the Civil War, like most of the big families around here. Hundreds of enslaved people worked these fields. After the war, they switched to sugar cane, using sharecroppers who weren't much better off than slaves. The money grew and grew. She walked to a small window that looked out at ground level to the overgrown gardens. By the 1950s, old Mr. Beaumont, Miss Aliner's father, had diversified into banking, real estate, oil. They were one of the wealthiest families in Louisiana. She turned back to Marcus. Then Miss Aliner's mother died and everything changed. Mr. Beaumont became harder, colder. He was always racist. That generation of Beaumonts wore it like a badge of honor. But after his wife passed, he became obsessed with the purity of the family line and legacy. That must have made her relationship with your brother difficult, Marcus observed. Mrs. Washington laughed without humor. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it. When Mr. Beaumont found out he nearly killed Robert, would have if Miss Aliner hadn't intervened. That's when he pulled strings to make sure Robert was drafted early. Her eyes grew distant with painful memory. We always wondered if he had something to do with what happened in Vietnam too, but we could never prove it. Marcus absorbed this, feeling a chill despite the basement's humidity. And the fortune, Aliner suggested it's mostly gone. It is, Mrs. Washington confirmed. After Robert died, something broke in Miss Aliner. She rebelled against everything her father stood for, started using her trust fund to support civil rights causes, scholarships for black students, voter registration drives. By the time Mr. Beaumont figured out what she was doing, millions had already gone. He disowned her. Tried to, but the trust was ironclad, her mother's doing. He couldn't touch that money. But he did remove her from his will, left everything else to his sister's son, William's father. Mrs. Washington shook her head. Not that it mattered much in the end. The Beaumont banks failed in the 80s. The oil investments went bust. By the time old Mr. Beaumont died in '93, the family fortune was a shadow of what it had been. "So what's left?" Marcus asked. "This house, some land." "A modest investment portfolio that generates just enough for Miss Alina to live on and keep the place from falling apart entirely." She fixed Marcus with a pointed look. "You're not marrying into wealth, Mr. Johnson. You're marrying into history, and history is a complicated bedfellow." As Marcus processed this information, a new thought occurred to him. "Why does William seem so convinced there's still a fortune, then?" Mrs. Washington's expression turned guarded. "That's a question you should ask Miss Alina." She checked her watch. "I need to start dinner. Miss Alina likes to eat precisely at 6. As she turned to go, Marcus called after her. "Mrs. Washington, thank you for telling me about Robert." She paused in the doorway. "I'm still deciding whether you deserve to know our family stories, Mr. Johnson, but Miss Alina seems to think you do, and I've learned to trust her judgment." With that, she disappeared up the stairs, leaving Marcus alone with the echo of Beaumont history surrounding him. That night, a thunderstorm lashed the old house, wind howling through cracks in the century-old windows. Marcus lay awake, listening to the rain and pondering the layers of complexity in his situation. What had seemed like a straightforward, if unusual, arrangement was revealing itself to be something far more intricate, a tapestry of love, loss, rebellion, and redemption that stretched back decades. And at the center of it all, Alina Beaumont, a dying woman who had chosen him for reasons that seemed to extend far beyond his ability to maintain an old plantation house. By the 4th day, Marcus had settled into something resembling a routine. Mornings were spent checking on Alina and discussing the house over breakfast. Afterward, he would tackle maintenance tasks, replacing rotted wood on the porch, clearing gutters, trimming back the invasive vines that threatened to swallow the east wing. The physical labor was therapeutic, giving him time to process everything he was learning. In the afternoons, he would sit with Alina in the study, where she had begun sharing stories of the house and her life. Some days she had more energy than others, but her mind remained sharp, her observations incisive. "You haven't asked about the locked room at the end of the upstairs hallway," Alina remarked that afternoon as Marcus brought her tea. "I figured you'd tell me about it when you were ready," Marcus replied, though his curiosity had been growing. Alina smiled faintly. "A diplomatic answer. The room contains what's left of the Beaumont family archives, documents, ledgers, photographs, the history of this place both glorious and shameful." She pulled a key from the pocket of her cardigan. "I think it's time you saw it." Marcus accepted the ornate brass key, feeling its weight both physically and symbolically. "Are you sure? If you're to be the steward of Beaumont House, you need to understand what that truly means." Alina's eyes held his. "Some of what you'll find there is difficult. The unvarnished truth of how my family built its wealth and power, but there's more to documents I've added over the years, my own attempts to balance the scales, however inadequately." Later, when Alina was resting, Marcus climbed the stairs to the locked room, key in hand. The mechanism turned smoothly despite obvious age, and the door swung open with a creak that seemed to echo down the generations. The room was smaller than he'd imagined, with a large oak table in the center surrounded by filing cabinets, bookshelves, and stacks of boxes. The air was thick with dust and the peculiar smell of old paper. A single window let in the afternoon light, which fell across the table where several leather-bound ledgers lay open. Marcus approached them cautiously, as if they might contain some physical manifestation of the past's horrors. The open page showed a meticulous accounting from 1858, purchases, sales, expenses. Among the entries listed as casually as livestock or equipment, Negro man, age 32, $1,200, and Negro woman and infant, $1,500. His stomach turned as the reality of what he was seeing hit him. These weren't just academic historical documents. They were the actual business records of human beings buying and selling his ancestors. Marcus had to step away from the table, his breathing shallow. When he had composed himself, he began a more methodical exploration of the room. One cabinet contained personal correspondence spanning over a century, letters that revealed the private thoughts of generations of Beaumonts, often expressing sentiments that would never have been voiced publicly. Another held photographs, formal portraits of stern-faced men and women in Victorian dress, later snapshots of family gatherings, and eventually, color photos from the mid-20th century. In one album from what appeared to be the 1960s, Marcus found more pictures of Alina with Robert Washington. They were never embracing or obviously romantic in public settings. But now that he knew their history, Marcus could see the connection between them in their body language, the way their eyes found each other even in group photos. A more modern filing cabinet in the corner held documents of a different nature, canceled checks to organizations like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and dozens of historically black colleges and universities. There were scholarship agreements, funding for community centers in predominantly black neighborhoods, and donations to restore African American cemeteries that had been neglected for decades. One folder contained newspaper clippings about a legal battle in the 1970s over voting rights in the parish, with Alina's name mentioned as a key financial supporter of the case against the very power structure her family had helped create. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus pieced together the dual narrative of the Beaumonts, the family that had prospered through oppression for generations, and the sole daughter who had spent much of her life trying to atone for those sins. The contradiction was jarring, yet somehow deeply human. In the last cabinet, he found a folder labeled simply Trust. Inside was legal documentation for the Alina Beaumont Educational Trust, established in 1972. According to the paperwork, the trust had been funded with the bulk of Alina's inheritance, millions at the time, and was dedicated to providing college scholarships for black students from Louisiana. Attached to the trust documents was a handwritten letter on Beaumont House stationery. "My dearest Alina, if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. Don't mourn me too long. What we had, brief as it was more than many get in a lifetime. Remember our dream, a future where what happened to us couldn't happen to others. Use what you have to build that future however you can. I'd rather see the Beaumont fortune educate 1,000 black children than buy you diamonds or sports cars. I'll love you until the stars burn out." Robert * Marcus carefully replaced the letter, feeling like an intruder in a moment of profound intimacy. He now understood Alina's cryptic references to reparation and her modest lifestyle despite the family's former wealth. She had been honoring Robert's memory and their shared vision by redirecting the Beaumont fortune toward healing some small fraction of the damage her family had done. When Marcus finally emerged from the archives room hours later, dusk had fallen. He found Alina in the parlor, a book open in her lap though she didn't seem to be reading it. "You found Robert's letter," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded, sitting across from her. "The trust, it must have been most of your inheritance." "Nearly all of it," Alina confirmed. "Over the years, it's provided full scholarships for more than 300 students." "Why didn't you tell me?" Alina closed her book. "Would it have changed your decision to accept my proposal?" Marcus considered this. "Maybe. It makes me question what I'm really doing here." "And what is that, Mr. Johnson?" "I thought I was providing companionship to a dying woman in exchange for financial security. Now I'm not sure what this is." Alina's gaze was steady. "It is still that in part, but it's also something more, a continuation, perhaps." "Of what?" "Of redemption, of transformation, of turning something built on suffering into something that creates opportunity." She gestured to the room around them. "This house has been in my family for 7 generations. For most of that time, it was a monument to inequality and oppression. In your hands, it could become something different." Marcus felt the weight of her expectations. "That's a lot to place on someone you barely know." "I know enough," Alina replied. "I know you grew up in foster care after your parents died. I know you worked 2 jobs to put yourself through community college. I know you send half your paycheck to support your grandmother in her nursing home." She leaned forward slightly. "I know what it is to love someone society says you shouldn't, and I know what it is to lose them." The parallels between Alina's past and aspects of his own life were unsettling. "You've been investigating me." "Due diligence," Alina corrected. "Beaumont House needs someone with both integrity and resilience. You have both in abundance." Before Marcus could respond, Alina was seized by a violent coughing fit that left specks of blood on her handkerchief. He quickly helped her to her room, where she took medications that left her drowsy and disconnected. As he sat beside her bed watching her drift into uneasy sleep, Marcus struggled with conflicting emotions. He had entered this arrangement believing he was taking advantage of an eccentric old woman's generosity. Now he wondered if it was the other way around, if Alina had selected him precisely, because she knew his background would make him susceptible to her vision of redemption. And yet, wasn't that vision something he could believe in? The transformation of a plantation built on human bondage into something that created opportunity and healing. He thought of his grandmother, who had raised him after his parents' death in a car accident. She had always told him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in what you did with whatever you had. By that measure, Eleanor Beaumont, who had given away millions to right historical wrongs, was wealthy indeed. As night settled over Beaumont House, Marcus realized that in just 4 days his understanding of his situation had been completely upended, and he sensed that there were still secrets waiting to be revealed. On the 5th day, Eleanor's condition worsened. Her doctor, a compassionate woman named Dr. Chen, visited in the morning and adjusted her medications, but her prognosis remained unchanged. "She's declining faster than we anticipated," Dr. Chen told Marcus privately. "The cancer has spread to her liver. I'd be surprised if she has more than a few weeks left, perhaps less." The news hit Marcus harder than he expected. Despite the transactional nature of their relationship, he had grown to respect Eleanor deeply in their short time together. The thought of her suffering filled him with genuine sadness. "Is there anything else we can do for her?" he asked. Dr. Chen placed a hand on his shoulder. "Keep her comfortable. Help her complete whatever matters most to her now. Sometimes when the end is near, people need to resolve unfinished business." After the doctor left, Marcus found Eleanor sitting up in bed, looking out the window at the oak trees that lined the drive. Despite her pallor and the visible weight loss of recent days, she maintained a dignity that was almost regal. "Dr. Chen doesn't believe in sugarcoating," Eleanor remarked as Marcus entered. "No," he agreed, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "She doesn't? Good, neither do I." Eleanor turned from the window to face him. "We have less time than I'd hoped, Mr. Johnson. There are things you need to know." Marcus nodded, prepared to listen. "William will contest the will," she said matter-of-factly. "He'll claim undue influence, diminished capacity, anything he can think of to invalidate your inheritance." "I assumed he might," Marcus replied. "Does he have a case?" Eleanor shook her head slightly. "My attorneys have prepared thoroughly. The marriage license, the multiple medical evaluations confirming my mental competence, the detailed prenuptial agreement specifying your obligations to maintain the property, all of it creates a strong legal foundation." She reached for a glass of water, her hand trembling until Marcus steadied it. "But legal battles are expensive and exhausting. William has resources and determination." "I'm not afraid of a fight," Marcus said, though in truth, the prospect of battling a wealthy, connected white man in Louisiana courts was daunting. "I know you're not, but I want you to be prepared." Eleanor's blue eyes held his. "There's something else William doesn't know, something I've never told anyone except my attorneys." She took a shallow breath. "There's more to your inheritance than just this house." Marcus waited, sensing they were approaching the heart of some mystery. "My mother came from old money, older even than the Beaumonts. When she died, she left a separate trust in my name, one that my father couldn't touch. I've never used it, never even acknowledged its existence to anyone in the family." "Why not?" Eleanor's smile was sad. "At first, it was a form of rebellion against my father. Later, after Robert died, money seemed meaningless compared to what I'd lost. I lived on my Beaumont trust and used most of it for the scholarships." She paused. "But my mother's trust has continued to grow, managed by a private bank in New Orleans. It now amounts to approximately $30 million. Marcus stared at her, certain he had misheard. "$30 million? Yes." Eleanor's expression remained calm, as if she hadn't just revealed a fortune. "The house and grounds are legally separate, as specified in our prenuptial agreement, but the Shaw Trust, my mother's family money, passes to you as my spouse. I never changed the standard inheritance provisions." The room seemed to tilt around Marcus. All this time, he'd believed he was inheriting a beautiful but burdensome old house that would require years of work and investment. The revelation of such wealth was disorienting. "Why?" he managed finally. "Why leave that to me?" "Because I believe you'll use it wisely," Eleanor replied simply. "Because in our brief acquaintance, you've shown more integrity than most people I've known in a lifetime. And because I want to give you the freedom to transform Beaumont House into something truly meaningful without financial constraints." Marcus stood and walked to the window, trying to process this information. $30 million would change everything, not just for him, but for his grandmother, for the community he'd grown up in, for countless people he could help. "This feels wrong," he said finally, turning back to Eleanor. "We barely know each other. This isn't what I agreed to." "No," Eleanor acknowledged. "It's more, does that trouble you?" "Yes," Marcus admitted. "It makes me question your judgment honestly. How can you possibly know I won't squander it?" "I don't know with absolute certainty," Eleanor said, "but I've observed you, researched your background, and listened to my intuition, which has rarely led me astray. I believe you are the right steward for both Beaumont House and the Shaw fortune. Marcus shook his head, overwhelmed. This changes our arrangement fundamentally. How so? Your obligations remain the same, to care for me in my remaining time, to maintain the property afterward, to honor its history while creating something new. The financial reality simply makes those obligations more feasible. Before Marcus could respond, Mrs. Washington knocked and entered with Aliner's lunch tray. She glanced between them, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Mr. Johnson has just learned about the Shaw Trust," Aliner explained. Mrs. Washington's eyebrows rose. "Ah!" She set down the tray and adjusted Aliner's pillows with practiced efficiency. "Been wondering when you'd tell him about that." "You knew?" Marcus asked, surprised. "I've been with Miss Aliner for 20 years, Mrs. Washington replied. "There's little I don't know." She turned to Aliner. "You need to eat something even if you're not hungry." As Mrs. Washington helped Aliner with her lunch, Marcus excused himself, needing space to think. He wandered the grounds, eventually finding himself at the small family cemetery where generations of Beaumonts were buried. The oldest headstones dated back to the early 1800s, grand marble monuments with elaborate inscriptions celebrating the patriarchs of a slave-owning dynasty. In stark contrast, a simple granite marker near the edge bore the name Robert Washington, 1940-51968, with the inscription "Beloved. Justice is what love looks like in public." Marcus recognized the quote from Cornel West, a choice that seemed both defiant and deeply personal. It was here, standing between the graves of oppressors and the memorial to the man Aliner had loved, that Marcus began to understand the true nature of the legacy being offered to him. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about healing, about transformation, about writing a new chapter in a story stained with suffering and injustice. Later that evening, he found Aliner in the study, looking through an old photo album. "I've been thinking about your revelation," Marcus said, sitting across from her. Aliner looked up, waiting. "I'm not comfortable with the idea of inheriting that much money from someone I barely know," he continued. "But I understand now why you've structured things this way. It's not really about me, it's about what the money and this house can become." "Yes," Aliner said simply, "so I have a counter-proposal. I'll accept the inheritance, but with conditions of my own." Aliner's expression showed interest. "Go on. Half of the Shaw Trust will go to expanding your educational foundation, more scholarships, more opportunities for those who have been systematically denied them." Marcus leaned forward. "As for Beaumont House, I want to transform it into a cultural and educational center, a place that honestly confronts the history of plantations while creating opportunities for community healing and growth." A smile spread slowly across Aliner's face, the first full, genuine smile Marcus had seen from her. "I had hoped you might come to such a conclusion on your own." "You were testing me," Marcus realized. "I was giving you the space to make your own choice," Aliner corrected. "The money without strings allows your true character to reveal itself." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions, residual discomfort at the manipulation, but also a growing certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. "One more thing," he said. "I want to name the educational foundation after Robert. It's his vision too, from what I've read." Aliner's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He would have liked that very much. As they sat together in the fading light, the old house seemed to settle around them, as if approving of the plans being made within its walls. For the first time since arriving at Beaumont House, Marcus felt not like an intruder or an imposter, but like someone continuing a legacy of transformation that had begun long before him. The sixth day dawned with a violent thunderstorm that seemed to shake Beaumont House to its foundations. Marcus spent the morning securing loose shutters and placing buckets under leaks that had sprung in several upstairs rooms. By midday, the storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed world and a rainbow arcing over the property. Aliner had been too weak to leave her bed, but Marcus wheeled her to the window so she could see the rainbow. "My grandmother used to say a rainbow was God's promise," he told her as they watched the colors fade. "My mother said something similar," Aliner replied, her voice thin but her mind still sharp. "She found faith a comfort. I never did, not after Robert." She turned from the window. "What about you?" Marcus considered the question. "I believe in something greater than ourselves. Whether that's God or the collective human capacity for good, I'm not sure." Aliner nodded. "A thoughtful answer. You're a thoughtful man, Marcus." It was the first time she had used his first name, a small but significant shift in their relationship. "There's something I need to show you," she continued. "In my closet behind the winter coats, there's a small safe. The combination is 71845. At Marcus's questioning look, she added, "Robert's birthday." Marcus found the safe exactly where she'd described. Inside was a manila envelope and a small velvet box. He brought both items to Alina, who took them with trembling hands. "These are the last pieces of the puzzle," she said, "the final truths you need to know." From the envelope, she withdrew a stack of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon. "Robert's letters from Vietnam, the only part of him I have left." She handed them to Marcus. "I'd like you to read them not now but after. They'll help you understand the foundation of the vision we shared." Next, she opened the velvet box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "He bought this before he deployed. We were going to marry when he returned, leave the South entirely if necessary." She closed the box carefully. "I've never worn it. It seemed wrong somehow, as if wearing it would mean accepting he was truly gone." Marcus felt the weight of her pain across the decades. "I'm sorry you lost him." "As am I," Alina replied. "But loss shaped the remainder of my life, gave it purpose." She replaced the ring in the box and handed it to Marcus. "I want you to use this to fund something specific, a program for young people from different backgrounds to learn about each other, to break down the barriers that kept Robert and me apart. Call it the Rainbow Program after today's sign of promise." "I will," Marcus promised, carefully setting aside the box and letters. They spent the afternoon talking, really talking, about their lives, their hopes, their losses. Alina shared stories of her childhood at Beaumont House, of the civil rights era as she experienced it, of her quiet decades of work to redirect her family's resources toward healing. Marcus told her about growing up in foster care after his parents died, about his grandmother who had eventually taken him in, about his dreams of creating community spaces that could transform lives the way the local library had transformed his. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Alina's breathing became more labored. Marcus called Dr. Chen, who came immediately. "It's time to increase the pain medication," the doctor said after examining Alina. "She'll be less lucid but more comfortable." After administering the medication, Dr. Chen took Marcus aside. "The end is very near now, hours, perhaps a day or two at most. Do you have any questions about what to expect?" Marcus had dozens of questions, none of which seemed adequate to the moment. "Will she suffer? With proper medication, no. She'll likely drift in and out of consciousness, becoming progressively less responsive." Dr. Chen placed a compassionate hand on his arm. "Just being present is the greatest comfort you can offer now." That night, Marcus sat beside Alina's bed as she slept fitfully. Mrs. Washington joined him for several hours, the two of them keeping vigil in a strangely comfortable silence. "She's lived a remarkable life," Mrs. Washington said finally. "Defied her family, loved my brother when it could have gotten them both killed, spent decades trying to balance scales that can never truly be balanced." "You've forgiven her," Marcus observed, "for being a Beaumont." Mrs. Washington considered this. "Alina stopped being a Beaumont and all but named the day she chose Robert over her family's legacy. What's to forgive?" She studied Marcus with newfound respect. "The question now is what you'll do with what she's giving you. It's a burden as much as a blessing." "I'm beginning to understand that," Marcus replied. As midnight approached, Mrs. Washington retired to the guest room down the hall, leaving Marcus alone with Alina. In the quiet darkness, illuminated only by a small bedside lamp, he found himself reflecting on the extraordinary turn his life had taken in less than a week. He had come to Beaumont House expecting a simple transaction, companionship, and care in exchange for property. Instead, he had stumbled into a complex legacy of love, loss, rebellion, and redemption that spanned generations. Alina stirred, her eyes opening. For a moment, they were clear and focused. "Marcus," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "promise me something." "Anything," he replied, taking her frail hand in his. "Promise me you won't let this house remain a monument to the past, make it live again, but differently." "I promise," Marcus said. "It will become something new while honoring the truth of what came before." Alina squeezed his hand weakly. "Then I can go in peace." Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the moon cast silver light across the room. "Robert always said the hardest choices lead to the greatest transformations. I believe we've both made such choices, you and I," as she drifted back to sleep. Marcus continued his vigil, feeling not like a fortune hunter or opportunist, but like the inheritor of a sacred trust, one that transcended money and property to encompass memory, justice, and the possibility of healing. Day 7 arrived with gentle morning light filtering through the curtains. Marcus, who had dozed in the chair beside Alina's bed, woke to find her watching him, her blue eyes clear despite her weakened state. "Good morning," he said, straightening in his chair. "Indeed it is," Alina replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I had a dream about Robert. He was waiting for me beneath the oak trees. A faint smile touched her lips. I think it won't be long now. Marcus helped her sip water through a straw, noticing how her cheekbones had become more prominent overnight, her skin almost translucent. Dr. Chen had warned him about the rapid changes that could occur in the final stages. Is there anything I can do for you? He asked. Alina considered the question. Read to me something hopeful. She gestured weakly toward the bookshelf. The blue volume Baldwin. Marcus found the book, a collection of James Baldwin's essays, and began to read from Nothing Personal. Baldwin's powerful words about America's capacity for both terrible injustice and remarkable redemption filled the room. As he read, Mrs. Washington arrived with breakfast, though Alina took only a few sips of tea. Mid-morning, William Beaumont returned unexpectedly. This time, his manner was subdued, almost respectful. I'd like to speak with my aunt, he told Marcus at the door. Alone, if possible. Marcus hesitated. She's very weak today. Please, it's important. After checking with Alina, who nodded her assent, Marcus left them together, waiting in the hallway where he could intervene if needed. Through the partially open door, he could hear their conversation. I spoke with your attorneys, William said. They made the situation quite clear. And, Alina's voice was faint but firm, and I won't contest the will or the marriage. It would be disrespectful to your wishes. There was a pause before Alina replied. Thank you, William. That's the first time you've respected my wishes in decades. I didn't come for absolution, Aunt Alina. William's voice had an edge to it. I came because I wanted you to know that I understand why you did it. Do you? The question hung in the air. Not all of it, but enough. William's voice softened slightly. I found the photographs of you in Washington in Father's desk after he died. I read the letters he intercepted. I've known about that part for years. And you said nothing. What was there to say? It was ancient history. Alina's laugh was a mere whisper. Not to me. Another pause, longer this time. I never understood why you gave away so much of the family money, William continued. It seemed excessive. It wasn't enough, Alina replied. It could never be enough. Maybe not, but it was something. William cleared his throat. I wanted you to know that while I don't agree with your choices, I can respect the conviction behind them. That's more than your father ever managed, Alina said. Perhaps there's hope for the Beaumont line after all. Marcus heard movement inside the room and stepped back as William emerged. The older man nodded to him stiffly. Take good care of her. She deserves a peaceful end. I will, Marcus promised. After William left, Marcus returned to find Alina more fatigued but somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. He surprised me, she admitted as Marcus adjusted her pillows. William has always been so much his father's son. People can change, Marcus said. Some can, Alina agreed. Others merely calculate. She reached for Marcus's hand. I need you to do something for me. Name it. In my study bottom drawer of the desk, there's a letter for Mrs. Washington. Would you bring it to her? Marcus found the letter and delivered it to Mrs. Washington, who was preparing lunch in the kitchen. She accepted the envelope without comment, but her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. As she read, tears filled her eyes. Is everything all right? Marcus asked. Mrs. Washington nodded, carefully folding the letter. Miss Alina is settling her accounts, she said cryptically, making things right while she still can. By afternoon, Alina's condition had deteriorated significantly. Dr. Chen visited again, adjusting medications and confirming what they already knew. The end was very near. Alina drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking clearly, other times murmuring words that made no sense. During one lucid moment, she fixed Marcus with an intense gaze. You'll find the safe deposit box key in my jewelry case. Box 713 at First National in New Orleans. There's one final piece there, documents you'll need. I understand, Marcus said, though in truth, he was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the layers of revelation and responsibility that had been unfolding throughout the week. As evening approached, Mrs. Washington joined them in Alina's room. The three sat in companionable silence as the light faded, each lost in their own thoughts. Occasionally, Alina would rouse and say something, a memory, a question, once even a fragment of song that Mrs. Washington recognized and finished for her. Around midnight, Alina became suddenly alert, her eyes wide and focused on something neither Marcus nor Mrs. Washington could see. Robert, she whispered, reaching toward the foot of the bed. You came. Mrs. Washington took one of Alina's hands while Marcus held the other. Alina smiled, a beautiful, peaceful expression that transformed her tired face. It's so beautiful, she murmured. The light everywhere. Her breathing slowed, became irregular. Marcus, she said, turning to him with effort, remember your promise? "I will," he assured her. "I promise." Alina nodded, satisfied. She turned to Mrs. Washington. "Darling, thank you for sharing him with me." Mrs. Washington nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Go to him, Alina. He's waiting." With a soft sigh, Alina Beaumont closed her eyes for the final time, her hand going limp in Marcus's grasp. The room fell silent except for Mrs. Washington's quiet prayers and the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Marcus sat motionless, struck by the finality of death despite having expected it. In just 7 days, this woman had upended his life, challenged his assumptions, and entrusted him with a legacy he was only beginning to comprehend. After Mrs. Washington called the funeral home and made the necessary arrangements, she found Marcus still sitting beside Alina's bed. "She's at peace now," she said gently, "with Robert where she always wanted to be." Marcus nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment. "Tomorrow will bring challenges," Mrs. Washington continued. "Legal matters, funeral arrangements, decisions about the house, but tonight it's enough to remember her and honor her passing." Later, unable to sleep, Marcus went to Alina's study and opened the bottom drawer where he had found Mrs. Washington's letter. There was another envelope there, addressed simply to Marcus. Inside was a handwritten letter dated just 3 weeks earlier. "Dear Marcus, if you're reading this, our time together was even shorter than I anticipated. I hope it was enough for you to understand why I chose you and what I'm asking of you." The Beaumont legacy is complicated, built on oppression, yes, but with an opportunity for redemption. The Shaw fortune comes with fewer historical burdens but equal responsibility. When you visit the safe deposit box, you'll find documentation of the full extent of both legacies, including details of the educational trust and instructions for accessing all accounts. My attorneys will assist with the legalities, but the moral compass must be your own. I believe you will transform Beaumont House into something that honors the full truth of its history while creating new possibilities for the future. The burden is heavy, but I wouldn't have chosen you if I didn't believe you were equal to it. Whatever judgment others may pass on our unusual arrangement, know this. I have made my choices deliberately and with full awareness of their implications. I hope you will find meaning and purpose in what I've entrusted to you. With respect and faith in your character, Alina Beaumont. P.S. There are fresh eyes looking at this house now, yours. See what I could not. Create what I could not imagine. The past need not determine the future, though it must always inform it. Marcus carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. Through the study window, he could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the oak trees that lined the drive, the same trees where Alina had dreamed Robert waited for her. In just 7 days, he had gone from a homeless, jobless young man to the inheritor of both tremendous wealth and profound responsibility. The journey ahead would not be easy, transforming Beaumont House, expanding the educational trust, navigating the complexities of his new position in a community steeped in racial and class divisions. But as the new day dawned, Marcus felt a sense of purpose that had eluded him throughout his life. Alina Beaumont had seen something in him that he had barely recognized in himself, a capacity not just to survive but to transform, not just to inherit but to reimagine. The poor black boy who had married an elderly white woman had indeed discovered her secret fortune, but it wasn't just the millions in the bank. It was the legacy of love, rebellion, and redemption that had shaped her life and would now shape his. Marcus opened the study windows to let in the fresh morning air. Beaumont House creaked and settled around him, no longer a strange and imposing presence, but a home with a future waiting to be written. 1 year later, the renovated ballroom of Beaumont House was filled with people, students, community members, local officials, and representatives from several historically black colleges and universities. On the walls hung photographs documenting the property's transformation over the past year, alongside historical images that unflinchingly depicted its plantation past. Marcus stood at the podium, surveying the crowd gathered for the official opening of the Robert Washington Center for Community Reconciliation and Education. Beside him sat Mrs. Washington, now the center's historian and community liaison, her brother's portrait prominently displayed behind them. "A year ago today," Marcus began, "I stood at the gates of this property, unsure if I belonged here. Today I welcome you all to a place that belongs to everyone, a place where history is acknowledged honestly, where healing happens daily, and where new opportunities are created." He gestured to the group of students seated in the front row. "Our first class of Robert Washington scholars begins their college journey next month, fully funded by the trust that bears his name." The Rainbow program has already brought together over 100 young people from different backgrounds to learn from each other and build bridges across historical divides. As he spoke about the center's mission and future plans, Marcus felt Aliner's presence in the carefully preserved details of the house. The crystal chandeliers now restored to their original brilliance, the family portraits contextualized with educational placards explaining the full history of the Beaumonts, including Aliner's decades of quiet reparative work. After the ceremony, as guests explored the grounds and exhibition spaces, Devin approached him. "Man, I still can't believe all this," his friend said, shaking his head in amazement. "When you told me you were marrying some old white lady for her plantation, I thought you'd lost your mind." Marcus smiled. "Sometimes I still think I did, but then I remember what Aliner used to say, the hardest choices can lead to the greatest transformations." "She must have been something else," Devin observed. "She was," Marcus agreed. "Complicated, flawed, remarkable." He looked around at the bustling activity, students engaged in animated discussions, community elders sharing stories, children exploring the new educational gardens where sugar cane had once been harvested by enslaved people. She saw possibilities that others couldn't imagine. Later, after the guests had departed, Marcus walked alone to the small cemetery where Aliner now rested beside Robert Washington, their headstones of matching granite standing as silent testimony to a love that had defied the boundaries of their time. The simple inscription on Aliner's stone read, "She chose love, she chose justice, she chose transformation." Marcus placed a single white rose between the graves. "We're doing it," he said softly, "creating something new from something old. Honoring truth while building hope." The evening breeze stirred the oak branches overhead, sending dappled light across the markers. "Thank you for seeing in me what I couldn't see in myself." As he walked back toward the house, his house now, though he thought of it more as a shared community asset, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The legal battles had been minimal thanks to Aliner's meticulous planning and William's surprising adherence to his word. The renovation had been extensive but deeply satisfying. The establishment of the expanded educational programs had already changed dozens of lives. From the terrace, Beaumont House looked different now, still imposing and historical, but no longer a monument to oppression. Windows that had been shuttered for decades now stood open. Spaces once reserved for the privileged few now welcomed all. The painful past wasn't erased, but rather contextualized and transformed into a foundation for healing. Marcus thought of Aliner's letter and her final instruction, "See what I could not. Create what I could not imagine." He believed he was honoring that charge, using the unexpected fortune not just to change his own life, but to create ripples of transformation throughout the community. The poor black boy who had married an elderly white woman had indeed discovered her secret fortune. But the true inheritance hadn't been the money at all. It had been the vision of what wealth could do when directed toward justice. The understanding that the past could be acknowledged honestly without determining the future. And the knowledge that the most valuable legacy is not what we accumulate, but what we transform. As night fell over Beaumont House, lights glowed warmly from windows that had been dark for generations. Tomorrow would bring a new group of visitors, new stories to share, new possibilities to explore. The work of transformation was never finished. Aliner had understood that, had dedicated her life to it. And now, so would he. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Pacific Stories for more morally complex narratives that explore the depths of human character and the possibilities for transformation and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do with an unexpected inheritance that came with both privilege and responsibility? How can we best acknowledge difficult histories while creating hope for the future?